Judge Judy had watched Arrogance walk into her courtroom 1,000 different ways. Expensive suits, forced smiles, loud voices, empty confidence. But on this particular morning, the silence shattered the instant a woman folded her arms, looked directly at the bench, and smirked. "You don't intimidate me," she said. "You're just a TV judge." The courtroom froze. Even the bailiff instinctively shifted his weight. Across the room, the plaintiff tightened his grip on a worn manila folder. It wasn't the expensive handbag sitting beside the defendant that caught Judge Judy's attention. It wasn't the designer sunglasses she refused to remove until ordered. It wasn't even the mocking smile spreading across her face. It was a single folded receipt sticking halfway out of that old folder. Judge Judy noticed it immediately. She said nothing. Experienced judges understand something most people never learn. Liars often prepare speeches. The truth usually arrives folded inside something ordinary. The defendant, Karen Whitmore, mistook that silence for weakness. She smiled even wider. What Karen didn't realize was that the smallest piece of paper in that courtroom was already beginning to unravel the story she had spent months trying to control. And before this case was over, one calm sentence from Judge Judy would erase every ounce of confidence Karen carried into that courtroom. But to understand why that single response became unforgettable, you first have to understand what everyone else completely missed. Before this story goes any deeper, make sure you're subscribed for more unforgettable courtroom stories like this. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. And while you're here, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, because this case is about to take a turn no one inside that courtroom expected. The case looked almost laughably simple on paper, a property damage dispute, just under $4,000. Nothing extraordinary. At least, that's what Karen wanted everyone to believe. She leaned back in her chair with the relaxed confidence of someone convinced the outcome had already been decided before the hearing even began. Every answer she whispered to her attorney carried the same message. This would be easy. Judge Judy slowly opened the case file. She didn't rush. She never did. Timing mattered. Across from Karen sat Daniel Carter, a quiet, middle-aged handyman whose faded work jacket looked older than some of the people sitting in the gallery. His boots were clean but heavily worn, and his hands carried the scars of decades spent repairing other people's homes. He wasn't looking at Karen. He wasn't looking at the cameras. He simply stared at the folder resting in his lap. That detail didn't escape Judge Judy. People seeking revenge usually watch their opponent. People seeking justice often stare at the evidence they hope someone will finally believe. Karen noticed Daniel avoiding eye contact and laughed softly. "Ladies and gentlemen," she whispered loudly enough for several people to hear, "he can't even look at me." A few uncomfortable glances spread through the gallery. Judge Judy remained perfectly still. She wrote 3 words on her legal pad. No one could see them. Karen certainly couldn't. But the plaintiff noticed. His breathing slowed. It was the first moment all morning that someone besides Judge Judy realized this hearing wasn't unfolding the way Karen imagined. The defendant continued speaking with polished confidence, dismissing Daniel as forgetful, emotional, and desperate for attention. Every sentence sounded rehearsed. Every gesture carefully practiced. The narrator could almost feel the courtroom's pulse changing. Confidence without evidence is only theater. Judge Judy finally looked up. She didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. She simply studied Karen's expression for several long seconds. That silence became heavier than any objection. Karen shifted in her chair for the first time, only slightly barely noticeable. But experienced judges don't look for dramatic reactions. They notice the smallest cracks first. Then Judge Judy reached toward the edge of Daniel's folder, not to open it, not yet. Instead, she asked the bailiff for one specific document that hadn't been mentioned by either side. Karen's confident smile flickered, just for an instant, because whatever Judge Judy had just requested Karen clearly hadn't expected it, and neither had anyone else in that courtroom. Daniel Carter stood only when Judge Judy asked him to approach the witness stand. He carried the same worn manila folder with both hands, almost as if he were protecting something far more valuable than paperwork. From the gallery, it looked like an ordinary folder filled with receipts. Judge Judy suspected otherwise. Years on the bench had taught her that people rarely protect paper with that much care. They protect memories. Daniel spoke softly. He wasn't polished. He wasn't charismatic. And he certainly wasn't trying to perform for the cameras. "I've repaired homes for 26 years, he began. "I've always believed that if you shake someone's hand, your word ought to mean something." The courtroom remained silent. Karen rolled her eyes. "There he goes with another speech," she muttered. Judge Judy didn't acknowledge the interruption. She kept watching Daniel. Real pain usually doesn't arrive dramatically. It arrives carefully, afraid that no one will believe it. Daniel explained that Karen had hired him to restore a historic sunroom after a severe storm damaged part of her property. They had agreed on every detail in writing. Materials were purchased. Weeks of labor were completed. Then everything changed. According to Karen, the work was careless. The repairs were worthless, and she refused to pay the remaining balance. On paper, it sounded like another contractor dispute. One person's work against another person's expectations, but Judge Judy sensed something deeper. She asked Daniel one simple question. "Why did you keep every receipt?" Daniel looked down at the folder before answering. "My wife taught me to." The courtroom became even quieter. He carefully opened the folder and removed an old photograph instead of another invoice. It showed a smiling woman standing beside him in front of a small pickup truck loaded with tools. "My wife passed away 2 years ago," Daniel said. "Before she died, she handled every receipt, every contract, every customer file. She always said, 'One day paperwork may have to speak for you when you can't find the words.'" No one laughed. Even Karen stopped smiling for a moment. Judge Judy looked at the photograph before quietly handing it back. "This case was never really about $4,000, the narrator observed. It was about the last promise a husband was still trying to keep. Daniel explained that after his wife's death, he continued organizing every project exactly the way she had taught him. Every receipt was dated, every delivery recorded, every conversation documented. Not because he expected trouble, because keeping those records made him feel like a part of her was still working beside him. Judge Judy didn't interrupt. She simply nodded. Bodies confess before mouths do. Daniel's hands trembled slightly while holding the photograph, not from fear, from memory. Karen leaned toward her attorney and whispered something that caused him to shift uncomfortably in his chair. She wasn't moved. She was impatient. Then she spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. A sad story doesn't make him right. Several people in the gallery exchanged uneasy looks. Judge Judy slowly turned toward Karen. Still no anger. Still no raised voice. Only careful observation. The narrator understood what many watching did not. When someone attacks another person's pain instead of answering the facts, they are often trying to redirect attention away from evidence. Karen had spent the morning insisting Daniel was forgetful, emotional, and confused. Yet every page inside that old folder was organized with remarkable precision. Dates matched. Signatures matched. Material purchases matched. The story Karen had told about a disorganized contractor was beginning to crumble before anyone had even reached the critical evidence. Judge Judy closed the folder gently. Then she asked Daniel one final question. "Mr. Carter, did anyone besides the two of you witness the final meeting at the property?" Daniel hesitated. Then he slowly nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." Karen's confident posture stiffened immediately. Because whatever answer was about to come next, she clearly hadn't prepared for it. The courtroom doors had barely stopped swinging when Karen Whitmore rose with the confidence of someone who believed consequences were for other people. She adjusted the sleeve of her tailored blazer, smoothed an invisible wrinkle, and offered a smile that never reached her eyes. It wasn't the smile of a person preparing to defend herself. It was the smile of someone who expected to dominate the room. Judge Judy noticed it immediately. People who believe status equals credibility often make the same mistake. They walk into court trying to impress the room instead of answering the facts. Karen had built a reputation in her community as a successful real estate investor. She regularly appeared at charity events, posed for local magazine photographs, and spoke proudly about restoring historic homes. To the public, she looked generous. To contractors who had worked for her, the picture was far more complicated. The narrator could already sense the contradiction. Some people protect their reputation with honesty. Others protect it by making sure no one dares challenge them. Karen leaned toward the microphone. "Mr. Carter wants everyone to think I'm some kind of villain," she said with a sarcastic laugh. "The reality is much simpler. He did poor work, and now he's trying to use sympathy to get paid." Her voice was calm, too calm. Every sentence sounded rehearsed. Daniel didn't interrupt. He simply lowered his eyes to the old folder resting on the table. Judge Judy watched both of them without saying a word. Silence has a strange effect in a courtroom. Honest people usually become more thoughtful. Dishonest people often feel compelled to keep talking. Karen chose to keep talking. "He forgets conversations," she continued. "He loses paperwork. Honestly, I think he's overwhelmed. Maybe retirement would be better for him." The words landed like a slap. Several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he refused to respond. The narrator understood exactly what Judge Judy was seeing. When someone cannot defeat the evidence, they often try to defeat the person presenting it. This was no longer a disagreement over repairs. It had become an attack on Daniel's character. Judge Judy finally broke the silence. "Whitmore," she said evenly, "you've described Mr. Carter as forgetful, because he is. And you're certain of that?" Karen answered without hesitation. "Absolutely." Judge Judy made a small note on her legal pad. No reaction, no lecture, just another note. Karen mistook that calm expression for agreement. She became bolder. "I've dealt with dozens of contractors," she said. "Most know better than to waste my time. He should have realized I wasn't going to pay for sloppy work." The arrogance in her voice filled the courtroom. Even her own attorney glanced sideways, as if silently wishing she would stop talking. Judge Judy noticed that, too. Experienced judges rarely focus only on the witness speaking. Sometimes the most revealing reaction comes from the person sitting beside them. Karen folded her arms and looked directly at Daniel. "You should have known you couldn't beat me." The sentence echoed through the room. No one moved, no one spoke. The bailiff looked toward Judge Judy. Daniel stared at the tabletop. For the first time that morning, Karen looked completely convinced she had already won. The narrator could almost feel the invisible shift taking place. Confidence built on intimidation often collapses the moment it meets someone who cannot be intimidated. Judge Judy slowly closed the case file. She removed her glasses. Then she looked directly at Karen. There was no anger in her face, only quiet certainty. She asked one simple question. "Mrs. Whitmore, if Mr. Carter is as forgetful as you claim." Karen smiled. "Then why did you send him a text thanking him for the quality of his work the day after the repairs were completed?" Karen's smile disappeared. Her attorney's head snapped toward her. Daniel slowly looked up. For the first time since entering the courtroom, the gallery fell into complete silence. Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. The silence that followed Judge Judy's question lasted only a few seconds, but to everyone in the courtroom it felt much longer. Karen Whitmore blinked, then she forced a nervous laugh. I don't remember sending any text like that." Judge Judy didn't react. She had heard that answer countless times before. Memory has a curious way of disappearing only when the truth becomes inconvenient. Karen glanced toward her attorney, silently searching for help. He didn't return her look. Instead, he quietly opened his legal pad. Realizing the case had just shifted beneath their feet, Daniel Carter remained motionless. He never smiled. He never celebrated. He simply watched the woman who had spent the last hour calling him forgetful begin to struggle with her own memory. The narrator understood why this moment mattered. People who build their confidence on controlling others often panic the instant they lose control of the conversation. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Carter," she said calmly, "when did you receive that message?" Daniel carefully opened the old folder, not dramatically, not triumphantly, with the same careful hands his late wife had taught to organize every document. "It came the morning after I finished the repairs." "And you kept it?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Why?" Daniel looked down at the folded receipt, tucked beside the printed text message. "My wife always told me," he paused, "never throw away the first compliment or the last promise someone gives you." A quiet murmur spread through the gallery. Even the bailiff lowered his eyes for a moment. Judge Judy accepted the printed copy. She studied it without speaking. The courtroom watched every movement. Karen shifted in her chair again. This time, everyone noticed. Real fear does not always shake. Sometimes it sits perfectly still. Judge Judy read aloud. "Thank you, Daniel. The sunroom looks beautiful. I'll transfer the remaining balance by Friday." She placed the paper back on the bench, then she looked directly at Karen. "Is that your phone number?" Karen hesitated. "Yes." "Is that your message?" Another pause. "It appears to be." The confidence that had filled the room only minutes earlier was beginning to disappear. But Judge Judy wasn't finished. "Then explain something to me." Karen swallowed. If the workmanship was unacceptable, Judge Judy's voice remained perfectly even. "Why did you call it beautiful?" Karen searched for an answer. "It was just something people say." Judge Judy raised one eyebrow. "So you routinely tell contractors their work is beautiful before refusing to pay them?" Karen opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The narrator could almost feel the courtroom pulse change. That wasn't just a contradiction. It was the first crack in an entire story, before the truth goes any further. "Tell us what you think." Was Karen trapped by her own words the moment that text appeared? Comment *justice below if you think Judge Judy already knows where this is heading. Judge Judy closed the text message file. "If that were the only evidence," she said, "this case would already concern me." Karen's attorney slowly looked toward his client. "What do you mean?" "Only evidence?" he asked quietly. Judge Judy didn't answer him. Instead, she reached beneath the stack of documents and picked up a small sealed envelope that had not been mentioned during the hearing. Daniel immediately recognized it. Karen did too. For the first time all morning, the color drained from her face. The narrator noticed something almost no one else did. Karen wasn't looking at the envelope. She was looking at the date written across the front. Whatever was inside, she already knew exactly what it was. Judge Judy carefully broke the seal. She removed a small flash drive. The courtroom became so quiet that the faint click of the USB drive against the bench sounded impossibly loud. Karen whispered under her breath. "Oh, no." Judge Judy looked toward the court clerk. "Please bring the courtroom monitor online." No one spoke. No one moved because everyone suddenly understood. The receipts had created doubt. The text message had created pressure. But whatever was stored on that flash drive was about to change the entire case. The courtroom monitor flickered to life. No one spoke. Karen Whitmore stared at the screen as if she already knew the next few minutes would erase everything she had built inside that courtroom. Judge Judy never rushed moments like this. Truth had its own pace. She handed the flash drive to the court clerk, who inserted it into the courtroom computer. Within seconds, a security camera recording appeared on the monitor. The timestamp matched the exact afternoon Daniel Carter had finished the repairs. Karen's attorney leaned forward. Daniel remained perfectly still. Judge Judy folded her hands and looked at the screen instead of the defendant. Experienced judges know that people often confess without speaking. Sometimes the evidence tells the story far more clearly than witnesses ever can. The video began. Daniel could be seen carrying his tools toward his truck while Karen walked behind him through the newly restored sunroom. The room looked exactly as Daniel had described: fresh windows, perfectly aligned trim, newly repaired flooring, not a single visible defect. Then Karen's voice filled the courtroom. It turned out even better than I imagined. The gallery exchanged stunned looks. Daniel said something that the microphone barely captured. I'm glad you're happy with it. Karen smiled on the recording. No contractor has ever cared this much about my house. Judge Judy didn't look away from the screen. She let the silence do its work. The narrator understood why this mattered. The text message had suggested Karen was satisfied. The video proved she had celebrated the finished work in person. But the recording wasn't over. Daniel loaded the last of his equipment into the truck. Karen waited until he closed the tailgate. Then she looked around to make sure no one else was nearby. Her expression changed completely. The warm smile vanished. Her voice became cold. You'll get your final payment when I decide you're worth paying. Daniel looked confused. We have a signed agreement. Karen laughed. So sue me. The courtroom gasped. Even Karen's attorney slowly closed his eyes. The recording continued. You contractors are all the same, Karen said. You work too hard because you need people like me. You'll never win against someone who knows how this works. Then she turned and walked back toward the house. The video ended. No one moved. No one dared break the silence. Judge Judy calmly removed her glasses and placed them on the bench. The first receipt created questions. The narrator observed. The text message exposed a contradiction. But that recording destroyed the story Karen had spent the entire morning telling. Karen's confident posture collapsed. Her shoulders sank. Her hands, once folded confidently across the table, now gripped the edge of her chair. She tried one final defense. That video doesn't show everything. Judge Judy looked directly at her. No, she replied calmly. It shows enough. Karen swallowed hard. I was frustrated. You weren't frustrated, Judge Judy answered. You were satisfied with the work. You admitted it twice. Then you decided you didn't want to honor your agreement. Karen looked desperately toward her attorney. He gave the smallest shake of his head. There was nothing left to argue. The narrator could almost feel the invisible shift inside the courtroom. Power had changed sides. The woman who entered believing she controlled every conversation now couldn't control her own breathing. Judge Judy picked up the worn receipt that had caught her attention from the very beginning. She held it beside the signed contract. Mr. Carter, she asked softly, why was this receipt folded separately? Daniel smiled sadly. My wife wrote something on the back before she passed away. Judge Judy carefully turned it over. Written in faded blue ink were 8 simple words. Honest work always outlives dishonest people. Asterisk. The courtroom fell completely silent. Daniel lowered his head. Judge Judy gently placed the receipt back into the folder exactly where she had found it. She looked once more at Karen. The truth, she said quietly, has finished asking its questions. Karen's eyes filled with panic, because she realized the next words from Judge Judy would no longer be about evidence. They would be the verdict. The silence in Judge Judy's courtroom had become almost unbearable. Karen Whitmore sat motionless. Only an hour earlier, she had walked into the courtroom believing confidence alone could overpower facts. Now, every confident word she had spoken had become another piece of evidence against her. Judge Judy looked once more at the faded receipt. Then she carefully closed Daniel Carter's folder. She didn't slam it shut. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked directly at Karen. The evidence in this courtroom tells one story, Judge Judy said. Your testimony tells another. The problem for you is that documents don't exaggerate, text messages don't forget, and your own video doesn't lie. No one moved. Karen opened her mouth as though she wanted to explain. Judge Judy lifted one hand. You've had every opportunity. Karen lowered her eyes. For the first time all morning, she looked like someone who understood she was no longer controlling the narrative. The narrator watched the transformation unfold. People often believe justice arrives with shouting. Sometimes it arrives in complete silence, carried only by undeniable proof. Judge Judy turned toward Daniel. Mr. Carter honored his agreement. He completed the work. He documented every expense. He communicated professionally. More importantly, he proved something this court values above all else. She paused. He proved credibility. Karen's attorney quietly placed his pen on the table. He knew the hearing was over. Judge Judy continued. Judgment is entered in favor of the plaintiff. The courtroom remained perfectly still as she announced the award. Ms. Whitmore will pay Mr. Carter the remaining contract balance, reimbursement for court costs, and additional damages permitted under this court's jurisdiction. Karen closed her eyes. The amount mattered. But it wasn't what truly defeated her. Judge Judy leaned forward one final time. Then she delivered the sentence that everyone in the courtroom would remember long after the cameras stopped recording. Asterisk. Respect is earned by honoring your word. Arrogance collapses the moment truth no longer needs permission to speak. The words hung in the courtroom. Karen didn't argue. She couldn't. The evidence had answered every question before she ever had the chance. Daniel slowly exhaled. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating. Instead, he reached for the old manila folder and carefully placed the faded receipt back inside. The narrator understood why. That receipt had never been about money. It carried the handwriting of the woman who had spent years reminding him that honesty was worth preserving, even when it seemed inconvenient. As Daniel left the courtroom, several people in the gallery quietly nodded to him. No applause, no cheering, just quiet respect. Sometimes that's the greatest victory a person can receive. Karen remained seated for several moments after the hearing ended. The confidence that had carried her into the courtroom had disappeared long before the verdict. Outside the courthouse, word of the hearing spread quickly through the local community. Within 24 hours, several contractors who had worked for Karen contacted one another after recognizing the pattern revealed in court. Within 48 hours, a local business association quietly reviewed complaints that had never before been connected. Within 72 hours, Karen's carefully maintained reputation had begun to unravel. Not because of rumors, but because people finally felt safe enough to tell the truth. Daniel returned to work the following Monday. He repaired another family's home. He organized every receipt exactly the way his late wife had taught him. And before placing the folder back into his truck, he looked once more at the handwritten message on that faded receipt. Honest work always outlives dishonest people. This time, the words felt different. Not because they had changed, because someone in authority had finally confirmed they were true. The narrator offered one final reflection. Courtrooms are filled with contracts, receipts, photographs, and legal arguments. But every so often, one ordinary object reminds everyone why justice exists in the first place. That faded receipt wasn't the strongest piece of evidence because it carried legal weight. It was unforgettable because it carried character. Truth rarely arrives dressed in luxury. More often, it arrives folded inside an old folder, protected by someone who refused to give up on being believed. If this story reminded you that integrity still matters, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more powerful courtroom stories, and share it with someone who believes honesty is always worth defending. And let us know in the comments, what moment changed your opinion of Karen the most?